understanding on how it affects us. And if you guys have any questions, you guys can just wait till the end, and then you can, there's some time that I saved so I can answer all of your questions. So after this presentation, you guys are going to be able to explain the need for sugar in our bodies and how we use it. You'll be able to explain the difference between fructose and glucose. You'll also be able to explain the health effects of having too much sugar in your diet. As well, you can discuss the current guidelines on sugar intake. You'll also be able to identify food products that contain too much sugar, and you'll be able to do this by looking at a nutrition facts panel. And you'll understand the pros and cons of artificial sweeteners. And lastly, you'll be able to list sugar substitutes to use more often. All right, so before we begin, there's this quote from the Quran that I wanted to share with you because I feel it's very on point with this topic. So it's from Surah Taha, and it's eat of the good and wholesome things that we have provided for your sustenance, but indulge in no excess therein. So again, this is an example of how the Quran also teaches us, or wants us to take responsibility and accountability for how we live our lives, especially with our diet as well. Okay, so to begin, what is sugar? So table sugar is a sucrose, and a sucrose is a molecule. So over here you can see the diagram that this is a sugar molecule, and it's made up of glucose and fructose. So that's what table sugar is, right? So table sugar is also a carbohydrate. It's found naturally in plants, and table sugar is derived from sugar cane and sugar beet. And like I said before, sugar is made up of two components, fructose and glucose, which we're going to be going to talk about detail right now. So why do we need sugar? So sugar from carbohydrates is the body's most important fuel sources. We need this for our body to do its daily functions, right? So glucose is accessible by most organs and tissues. Our body needs it, and it's the preferred fuel source for the brain and the muscles. So this is why we need glucose. So a lot of people who follow a low-carb diet or try to avoid a lot of sugars, that's good, but you have to remember that you need carbohydrate in your body for your brain and your muscles. That's how they get their energy from. So it's not a good idea to be following a low-carb diet for an extended period of time. Simple carbs are also found in fruits and dairy. And complex carbs are just different structures of sugar molecules, and they're also found in grains and starches. So when we have too much glucose in our body, it takes what it needs, and then it's stored in tissues and muscles for later use. So fructose. So again, if you guys remember from the diagram, fructose is one of the sugar rings that make up table sugar, okay? So it's a type of sugar molecule, and it's naturally found in fruits and honey and has a low glycemic index. So fructose is very, very sweet. So there's very little amounts of it in fruit, so we digest it easily. However, in the Western diet, there's too much fructose, okay? We get a lot of fructose from soda, from baked goods, crackers, cookies, canned goods. Pretty much anything that's in a package or a container is likely has some fructose in it. And the food company loves fructose because, it helps with the shelf life of foods. So since the 1900s, the fructose intake in our diets have quadrupled, and especially in the last 30 years, the fructose consumption has gone up dramatically. And during this 30-year time, it also parallels with the rise and increase of obesity, with diabetes, hypertension, insulin resistance, and fatty liver. So it's a bit of a coincidence that with the higher amount of fructose, we're seeing these diseases. And what's important here to realize is the way our body handles fructose. So like I said before, right? There are foods that naturally contain fructose, like fruit, but it's very tiny. So it's digested pretty easily. But with all this processed food, the high intake of fructose, our body can't handle it properly, and it's not digested, it's not metabolized the same way glucose is. So instead, it's metabolized in the liver. So the liver, when it gets all this fructose, it doesn't handle it properly. It's overwhelmed by it. So the liver just takes the fructose that it gets and releases it back into the bloodstream as fat. and this fat is called triglycerides. So this triglycerides is a type of cholesterol, but when we have too much fructose in our diet, it also raises our triglyceride levels, and this is incredibly dangerous. So triglycerides is pretty much having a type of fat that's just floating in your bloodstream. It's not being metabolized, and it's just there. So, you know, obviously being careful of your diet is very important. And so, like I mentioned before, some of the foods that contain a lot of fructose, especially sodas, this is probably the single worst thing you could have in your diet, because it's just a huge amount of fructose that your body is getting. So now just to move on a little bit more on fructose, there's been a ton of research that's been done on fructose, and of course, they're all animal studies. It's unethical to do some studies on humans. So what they have found has been really interesting. So they have found that fructose actually alters hormones for satiety. So we don't get the same signal of our brain telling us, you know, if it's full or not. And they've seen this in rats. So rats that are fed a diet higher of fructose compared to glucose, they don't have this hunger signal. So they don't know when to stop eating, and they're continuously hungry. They also found diets or animals that were fed a fructose diet compared to another starch diet, the fructose diet, they were the hungrier the next day. So there's also a study that was done in the Endocrine Society in 2010, and they found that kids who had a high fructose diet actually had more fat in the midsection. So they was leading to obesity. So, you know, it's hard to say, yes, fructose is causing all these diseases, but there's a very strong correlation between them. Okay, so that's what fructose is. And we're going to go into a little bit more detail, and I'll show you where you can find it in foods and what to look for. So now we're going to talk about glucose. And again, glucose is the other ring that makes up a sugar molecule, okay? And it's the most common form of carbohydrate. And it is derived, also you find it in fruits and vegetables, grains, legumes, and it provides the starch the liver needs to make glucose. So, like fructose, how it was all metabolized in the liver, glucose is not. It's metabolized in the intestinal tract, okay? And it causes a rise in your blood sugar. So in order to bring our blood sugars back down, your body releases a hormone called insulin. So insulin, you can kind of think of it as a chaperone. So it takes all the sugars that is in your body, and it takes it to the cells that need it, okay, for energy. And the rest is used for long-term storage, which is our fat cells. So if you have a high sugar diet, you know, if your body's not using it for energy, it's going to just get stored, and that's how people gain weight. And then when glucose is always high, and this can be obviously with our diet from processed foods, white flour, white bread, pastas, and rice, it puts a strain on the pancreas. So the pancreas getting, you know, a bit stressed out because it's getting all these signals that the sugar is really high and it needs to release insulin. But it comes to a point where the insulin is not being secreted properly to usher all that sugar into our cells. So this is what can lead to diabetes, okay? It's because the insulin is not responding properly because it's overloaded with a lot of sugar. Okay, so now looking at sugar in common foods, right? We all hear about natural sugars, and then we hear about added sugars, right? Or added sources of sugars. So naturally, we do get sugars or sugars from fruits, from vegetables, dried fruit, from dairy, specifically milk and yogurt, honey, and maple syrup. Okay, so just because these are natural sources, it doesn't mean that we can eat as much as we want from this. And a lot of people have a hard time understanding this because, yes, fruits are really good for you, but if you're eating like, you know, 2 bananas a day, like 3 apples, that's a lot of sugar that you're ingesting. And at the end of the day, your body just sees the sugar. It doesn't know it doesn't really care so much if the sugar is coming from a cookie or from an apple. It just sees sugar. So, you know, being careful with how much sugar you take in is super important. So with fruits, you know, a typical serving is about 2 or 3 times a day of your fruit intake. Vegetables again have very limited sugars. There are some vegetables that have more, like corn and peas, so you have to be a little bit careful with your intake. Dried fruit, it's a very high concentrated amount of sugar. So here is this diagram or this picture it shows you 2 cups of grapes and it shows you a 1/4 cup of raisins. So, you know, grapes, when the water's all taken out of it, you get raisins, right? Sorry, the grapes. So here, obviously, you would feel a little bit more fuller if you've had the grapes versus the raisins. So just dried fruit, just to remember, a little goes a long way. Yes, it's good for you. It has nutrients, it has vitamins, but it also has sugar, so you have to be careful how much you have. And sticking to the whole fruit itself is a better idea. Like, you get so much more out of eating 2 cups of grape versus a 1/4 cup of raisins, right? Again, honey and maple syrup. A lot of people, you know, they always ask me, you know, instead of sugar, I'm going to use maple syrup or honey. It's great, but at the same time, you're still getting sugar in as well. So you just have to be careful with how much you have. So the added sources, sodas, like I mentioned before, they have a huge amount of sugars in them, especially high fructose corn syrup, right? Candy, cookies, cereals even, baked goods like muffins, cakes, all that have a lot of added sources of sugar. You know, they're not naturally found in there. They're made to have sugar in them. So what are the health consequences with too much sugar? Well, first of all, obesity, right? We all know that obesity is on the rise, weight gain, especially. So like I mentioned to you about a study that was done that showed kids who had a lot of fructose in their diet had their fat cells were more mature. That means they were just carrying on a lot more weight. So that's where the obesity comes in. High blood pressure, again, there's been a lot of studies showing that a high sugar diet actually affects the pumping mechanism of your heart, which can be very dangerous. Elevated triglycerides and heart disease. Again, like I mentioned before, the triglycerides get elevated because the sugar, the liver can't process it so much, and it just sends the sugars back into the bloodstream as triglycerides. And this is really dangerous to have, you know, with elevated triglycerides. Not only is your cholesterol going to be high, but it's also you're on the step closer to diabetes, right? And inflammation. When our body's in a state of too much sugar, you're in a state of inflammation. You know, how I talked about before about the insulin being released, like, it's such a controlled mechanism that's very tightly controlled, the glucose and the insulin. So when that's off balance, your whole body is in a state of inflammation. Insulin resistance, again, when, you know, sugar is not being utilized efficiently, can lead to diabetes and premature aging, right? So again, I'm not just talking about, you know, wrinkles with premature aging, but I'm also talking about aging of the brain. And there's been a lot of studies showing that with a high sugar diet, not only does the brain deteriorate, but your memory as well. So it just accelerates the aging process. So how much sugar is too much? Like, how do we know how much sugar to have in our diet? Well, unfortunately, this is probably one of the big problems that we have right now, because there are no limits that have been set to tell us, okay, you can only have this much a day. So worldwide, we're consuming 500 extra calories a day from sugar alone. And the American Heart Association recommends that women consume, so this is pretty much the only recommendation that's out there, less than 100 calories from added sugar per day, okay? That's 6 teaspoons or 24 grams of sugar in a day from added sugar. And these just sound like numbers to you, but I'll give you some examples of what exactly this looks like, okay? So just remember, for women, 100 calories of added sugar a day, that's equivalent to 6 teaspoons or 24 grams. And men, their guidelines is to consume less than 150 calories per day from sugar, and that's equivalent to 9 teaspoons or 36 grams of sugar. Okay, so how to reduce sugars in our diet, right? So obviously, what we eat is very important, and to choose wisely the foods that we have. You know, reducing the amount of added sugar, and also choosing food that has a lot of protein in it is key. Fiber. These two nutrients actually signal to our body a sense of fullness. So the more protein and fiber that we have, it just masks the sugar spikes that we see in our body. So when our sugar is, you know, go up really quickly and then go down, it also affects our mood as well and our energy levels. So if we have a diet that's rich in protein, that's high in fiber, it's going to kind of counteract that sugar. So again, including protein, fiber is very important. Omega-3s, you guys all have heard about omega-3s, and that's also very important, and it's great for reducing inflammation. And like I mentioned before, when you have a lot of sugar in your body is in a state of inflammation. So omega-3s are wonderful for helping control that. And again, foods that have omega-3 include salmon, walnuts, flaxseed actually is a great source of omega-3, and also chia seeds. I don't know if you guys have tried that, but they're just these small black seeds, and they're great because it also has protein in it and fiber. Same with flax seeds. Flax seeds actually have a lot of fiber as well. So it's important to look at these three nutrients, protein, fiber, and omega-3s, to have in your diet, okay? And then also gradually decrease the amount of sugar that you're taking in. So for example, if you take 2 sugars in your tea or coffee, reducing it slowly by like 1.5 teaspoons to 1 teaspoon, that's more efficient way to control the sugar. If you just, don't have any sugar or go cold turkey, it's not a lifestyle change. You want to really try to, make this part of your lifestyle to reduce the amount of sugar that you're taking in. And also consuming less processed foods. I mentioned before, the food industry loves to use high fructose corn syrup. It's cheap, it's available, it makes the food taste better. And, we as consumers are going to buy it because we don't understand what some of the ingredients are. So eating less processed foods, focusing on whole foods, foods that are, anything that's fresh, that's not, in a package is a better choice for you to have. And also exercise really helps reduce the amount of sugars in our body, the excess sugars that we have. Like I mentioned before, right? Glucose is the primary fuel source for our brain and our muscles. So when you're exercising, the cells need sugar almost immediately. So the excess sugar that's floating around in our body is being used to move. So exercise should actually be seen as medicine, essentially, because it really does a lot to help reduce the amount of sugars that's in our body. And, the general recommendation is 30 minutes of aerobic activity for 5 times a week. And also weight loss. Just being at a healthy weight could really help you with controlling your cholesterol, your sugars as well. And you want to aim for, a 10% weight loss. And if you have like high sugars, high cholesterol, you want to aim for a 10% weight loss, and you'll see a huge change in your lab values. So before, going on medication, changing your lifestyle is so important and can do so much for you. Okay, so now I'm just going to go and talk about some food products, okay? I'm going to show you guys what to look for when you're purchasing food and how you need to look at the nutrition facts panel and the ingredients, okay? So here we have a common cereal, Raisin Bran. Right on the cover of the box, you see that it's an excellent source of fiber, which is true. If you look at the nutrition facts panel, the fiber intake is 7 grams, which is great. However, if you look at the sugar grams, we see 19, okay? And I don't know if you guys remember, but there was that guideline for the women to have 6 teaspoons of sugar, which is 24 grams of sugar, okay? So here you have a cereal that's 19 grams of sugar in 1 cup, which is really high. Okay, now I'm going to show you a cereal that has a lower sugar intake. So if we look at this one, it has 4 grams of sugar, which is a lot better than the previous one, right? And again, it still has protein and it still has fiber. So one thing that I want you guys to look for when you guys are buying food, okay, you want to make sure that the sugar is the same, it's about the same or even lower than the fiber and the protein. So here it's equivalent to the protein. And the fiber, actually, there's more fiber than sugar in this cereal, so that's excellent. So like before, for the Raisin Bran, we saw that the fiber was 7, sugar was 19, and the protein was 5. So, here, this is totally skewed. There's way more sugar intake than any of the good stuff that you want. So again, you want it to be around the same number or lower than the fiber and the protein. I hope that makes sense. So another product is juices. This is where we get a lot of sugar from. And I know I did discuss the difference between natural sugars versus added sugars. And when you are buying food, it doesn't tell you, oh yes, well, I guess here in this instance, juice is just the natural sugar because the only ingredient on here is oranges. But with some other foods, it's hard to differentiate which is natural, which is added. So that's why you have to look at the ingredient list too, which we will take a look at. But here, the only ingredient here is oranges, right? But the sugar that we see is so high, it's 23 grams. So even though a product is natural, that's naturally high in sugar, you have to be careful, and you can't just, drink juice all day because it has a lot of sugar in it. And like we discussed earlier, that when you have excess sugar, it's just gonna, and it's not used, it's gonna go into our fat cells, and we're just gonna gain weight because it's just calories. So here's a juice that, it is natural, it's great, but again, the sugar is so high, and then when you look at the fiber and the protein, they only have 1 gram of that. So you have to be careful, and it's so much better to have a whole orange instead of the juice, because a whole orange, you do get a lot more fiber from it. You get I think an actual orange has about 12 grams of sugar and 3 grams of fiber. So it's a much healthier option than having the juice. So here's a drink that's lower in sugar. Again, we see it's, again, for the same serving size, is 8 ounces, which is 240 ml, and has 11 grams of sugar. So this is a lot better than, the orange juice, which is 23 grams of sugar. Again, it's all natural as well, but it's a lower sugar product versus the orange. So again, looking at the nutrition facts panel, we can see which juice to choose more of, right? And it's fine if you have orange. I have orange juice in my house right now. My husband really likes it, but he doesn't drink it all the time. So, it's fine that you have some of these foods, but, just in moderation is key, and not having it so much. Or even diluting it. You can try, if you really like orange juice, you can just try having, mixing with a little bit of water to dilute it so the sugar is not as concentrated. And yogurt, okay? I get so many questions about yogurt. Yes, yogurt is great. It's a healthy food, but you have to be careful which yogurt you are having. And now when we go to the grocery store and in the yogurt aisle, there's so many varieties and flavors. It's just so overwhelming. And this product, I have a lot of people who love Activia. They do a great job of marketing their product as being, good for digestion with their probiotics and so forth. So just to be clear, all yogurt has probiotics in them, okay? So you want to be careful with the ones that you're choosing. So this particular yogurt has, you can see over here, the sugar is 17 and the protein is 4. There's no fiber in yogurt. So that's a huge difference, okay? So you're getting a lot of sugar from this small yogurt container. So let me show you another yogurt. It's the Liberté Greek yogurt. And if we look at the nutrition facts panel here, we see the sugar for the serving size, which is 3/4 of a cup, is 5 grams of sugar. And look at the protein, it's 18. So that's such a great product, right? Because it's 18 grams of protein versus 5 grams of sugar. And if we look at the Activia, it's reversed. It's 17 grams of sugar and only 4 grams of protein. And I remember how I told you the guideline, you want the sugars to be lower than the protein or the fiber, right? So this is actually one of my favorite yogurts. There's so many out there, but I really like this one, and it's Greek yogurt. So the benefit of Greek yogurt is that there's twice as much protein, as we see, or 18 grams, compared to regular yogurt. And the reason for this is because Greek yogurt requires twice as much milk to make it. So it has a thicker product, and they drain out all the liquids. So you're left with a really good high protein product. And again, this is an unflavored yogurt, and this is what I recommend. You get plain yogurt, and then you can flavor it yourself. Again, it's 5 grams of sugar, which is about a teaspoon of sugar. But this is naturally, dairy has natural sugars in it. So if you look at the ingredient list here, and I want you to remember this, it's just skim milk and bacteria cultures, right? It's a probiotic. It's just made from skim milk. So now, like I said, we have to look at the nutrition facts panel, but we also have to look at the ingredient list. So this is the ingredient list for the raisin bran, okay? So we saw that it had 17 grams of sugar. Now we need to look at the ingredient list to see where is the sugar coming from. So yes, raisins, we saw earlier that raisins are a concentrated amount of sugar. So yeah, it's the second ingredient. But then we also see sugar has been added into the cereal, right? And corn syrup, it's another form of sugar. So yes, we are getting added sugar in the cereal, even though it sounds like a healthy cereal. We need to look here to see what exactly it's containing. And usually a guideline here is if you see sugar as the first 3 or first 5 ingredients, that's not a good sign. So just to keep that in mind. So this is the ingredient list for the Activia yogurt, right? So look at this. We see fructose as the third ingredient. And, I was just sharing with you guys some of the data on fructose and how dangerous this type of sugar can be for our liver and for our body. So this is the third ingredient. It actually comes before strawberries, which is a strawberry flavored yogurt. And then again, you get more sugar and a whole bunch of other stuff. So, compare this to the other yogurt that I showed you guys, which was just milk. You can see how, this Activia yogurt is not a good choice at all, and it just has tons of sugar in it. Okay, so this is just there's actually more other names for sugars, but this is what I could fit onto the slide. So when we're looking at the ingredient list, sometimes we're not going to see sugar right there. We're going to see other names. So we see here agave nectar, and a lot of health products you see a lot of agave nectar. And actually, this is not a good source of sugar at all. It's all fructose. 90% of it is fructose. And, that's really dangerous for you to have. So just be mindful of that. So we have agave, brown sugar, cane sugars, cane, corn sweetener, corn syrup, evaporated cane juice. This is another word for sugar. We see this in a lot of organic products. So even if something is organic, it doesn't mean it's necessarily healthy for you, because usually this, second or third ingredient will have evaporated cane juice. Syrup, fructose, fruit juice concentrate, glucose, high fructose corn syrup. This is something that I talked about earlier as well. So all these are different names of sugar. So you just have to be really careful when you're looking or buying a product to see how this, if any of these fall into the ingredient list. So now what about artificial sweeteners, right? So we all know that sugar is not good for you, and, we have a ton of artificial sweeteners out there on the market right now, and, it seems too good to be true. You get the sweetness without the calories, right? And yes, that does sound great, and yeah, it is an option, but I don't think it's the best option for you. Artificial sweeteners are exactly what they sound like. They're artificial, right? They're man-made. They're made in a factory. So they're chemicals, essentially. So I don't think it's a good idea to resort to artificial sweeteners. Sucralose, aspartame, these are all chemicals, right? That's been produced, man-made. And we find them in many diet foods, low-fat products. If something is sugar-free, it's going to have artificial sweeteners in there. So you want to avoid that as much as possible. I'd rather you eat a little bit of sugar than to have something that has a lot of artificial sweeteners in it. Because there's also a lot of studies being done to show that these foods that have artificial sweeteners in it, it doesn't send the right signals to our brain. So when we have something that's sweet, it signals to our brain that we're going to have a calorie intake coming in. But when we don't get that calories coming in, your body is kind of looking for ways to get that calories in. So sometimes we're even find that we're hungry or crave sweet things even more when we have artificial sweeteners. So the way this plays in our body, it's just, it's so unclear right now, and it's just not a good idea to resort to artificial sweeteners. I know we discussed about sodas and how bad they are for you, and yes, there are diet sodas, but again, they're just filled with artificial sweeteners. So it's not a good idea to have that. Like I said, it can lead to eating more sweet foods or drinks. And then we have sugar alcohols, okay? So sugar alcohols, the structure resembles a sugar and it resembles an alcohol. And it doesn't have any calories in it either. However, if we ingest too much of it, and we find this in a lot of diet foods, a lot of gums, like chewing gum. Actually, chewing gum has a very low amount, but you'll see it in like certain diet chocolate or candies. And it could lead to a lot of GI upsets in your stomach. So a lot of people are very sensitive to this. So it's not a good idea to resort to sugar alcohol. And then there's stevia, okay? And this is from a plant. So it's natural. It's from a plant originated in South America. And it's 200 times sweeter than sugar. So again, with stevia, there's some other food giants that have, taken on this product and made it their own, like Truvia. And again, they've added so much other stuff to it. So there's some sugar alcohols in there as well. So if you are going to resort to an artificial sweetener, stevia is probably a better choice. It's lesser of the evils, but you want to look for an all-natural leaf stevia, okay, as the main ingredient. You want to make sure that it doesn't have any other sugar alcohols or any other additives in. And not everyone likes stevia. It has an aftertaste to it, so it's very personal whether you like it or not. But if you are looking for a sweetener, stevia is something that you could try. But again, you want to make sure it's an all-natural leaf stevia. Okay, so my top picks for sugar, my number one is maple syrup. Again, it is a natural source of sugar, right, maple syrup, but there are some other vitamins in there as well. So it's a better alternative than table sugar because it's not refined, or it's not processed like table sugar is. It's natural. And also, maple syrup is Canadian, so it's great because it's local. It's not found in other countries. It's here in Canada, so that's always nice. Honey is also another good one to use. Again, honey and maple syrup, they have sugar in them, but it's just an alternative to table sugar, and especially in baking. I love using maple syrup instead of sugar, and for 1 cup of sugar, for recipe calls for 1 cup of sugar, it's the equivalent of 2/3 of a cup of maple syrup. Honey is also another great option to have as well. And then just sticking with the real stuff, the real sugar, just being careful of how much you put in. Just the regular sugar. If you, are having tea or coffee with a sweetener, I'd rather you have real sugar and have a smaller amount of that than to have a packet or two of the artificial sweetener. And like I mentioned again, stevia, that's another choice that you could have. Again, you just want to make sure it's a purely stevia and not a brand that has other stuff in it. So that's really important to look for, the purely. Okay, so I'm ready to answer any questions that you guys may have. For more information, you can visit my website at anarallidina.com, or you can email me at nutrition@anarallidina.com. So yeah, if anyone has any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer. Okay, so I have a question here. Oh, sorry, I didn't see the first question. So is the sugar high in the syrup because of the raisins? Yes, so let's go back to that. Yes, like I said, right, when we look at the nutrition fact panel, it doesn't tell us where the sugars are added or added sugars or natural sugars. So yes, it is from the raisins. We see it's the second ingredient. However, we also see that there is sugar being added in here, the fourth ingredient, and then corn syrup, right? It's another name for sugar. So we're having sugar and corn syrup added into the cereal. So yes, that is contributing to the high sugar values that we see. Raisins obviously does increase it as well, but then there's also sugar being added into the cereal. So I hope that answers the question. So it's both. And then the second question, the maple syrup you're mentioning is pure stuff. Yes, I am. It is a real maple. You want to look for 100% maple syrup. And Costco actually sells, they have their own brand, the Kirkland brand of 100%. You want to look for something that's 100% maple syrup. The Aunt Jemima, I think it just has a fraction of maple syrup added into it, so you want to avoid that, and you want to stick with the real stuff that's 100%. Okay, so another question, organic cane. Yes, so I did mention this over here for other names of sugar, and with the evaporated cane juice. It is pretty much the same thing. It's just a fancy way of saying sugar, and you see this in a lot of organic products. So the reason why organic foods are organic, you see it in organic foods, is because it's not as I guess like processed as table sugar is, but it still is sugar. And like I said, whether your body, when it gets sugar, it doesn't care whether it's from a cookie or from an apple. Like, it just sees sugar. So this is exactly, if you're buying something that has evaporated cane juice in it, you've got to remember that this is just another name for sugar, and it acts the same way as regular sugar would in our body. Is there any sugars in Coke Zero? Well, there's artificial sweeteners in Coke Zero. There's no sugar in Coke Zero. But again, I was talking about artificial sweeteners and how dangerous this can be, because it doesn't, our body's kind of getting mixed signals. So we're getting this sweetness, but we're not getting the calories that we expect from the sweetness. So by drinking this, it's just kind of leading for us to have more sweet foods or drinks as well. So that's the danger with Coke Zero or diet sodas or diet juices in general. You're just getting a lot of artificial sweeteners, which can kind of mess up the way your body's, how your body reacts to food. So if you're having something that has a lot of artificial sweeteners, you're just more prone to having something that has sweet in it to kind of fulfill that satiety that your body is looking for from getting the calories from the sweetener. If that makes sense. So, if you're going to have Diet Coke versus regular Coke, they're both, in my opinion, they're both not that great. And it's best to try to avoid that or decrease the amount that you actually have. If you usually drink a can of Coke a day, maybe decreasing it to half a can or having one can every couple of days until it's, until you're not dependent on it so much. So what is the difference between pasteurized and unpasteurized honey? I think this just has to do with unpasteurized honey. I can get back to you on this. Honey, I don't know if I've ever seen unpasteurized. I guess raw honey. I don't think this affects the sugar content of it so much. It's just the way it's been processed, and some people, you're just at a higher risk of, I guess, having something that's unpasteurized versus pasteurized, just like milk. There are a lot of people that drink unpasteurized milk, but you've got to understand that your risk for obtaining a foodborne illness is higher. But in terms of the sugar content, I don't think it actually makes a difference. Okay, so dates. And yes, so dates are highly recommended to eat in the sun, especially during pregnancy. Yes, during pregnancy and nursing. Do they contain a lot of sugar? Great question. So so here it is, right? It's a natural source of sugar, dried fruit. And it does have fiber in it, but yes, if you have a lot of dates, that's not good for you because your body is just taking all that extra sugar, it's taking what it needs, and then the rest of it is just being stored as fat. So yes, dates are good for you. It's a natural source of sugar, but you need to be careful of how much you're having. And it is recommended to have during your pregnancy, but again, they're not recommending you to have like 10 dates. It's just like a couple a day should be plenty for you to have. And especially with nursing as well, like right after birth, it helps with your milk production. Yes, that's true. But again, you don't need to have so much of it. Having a couple is definitely fine. What are good low sugar snacks you would recommend for weight loss? Okay. So for weight loss, you want to try so low sugar foods. You want to stick with the actual fruit itself, right? So fruits are low in sugar, than fruit juice. You want to have foods that have protein and fiber, okay? So let's take a look at the cereal over here. So like I said, when you're looking at a product, especially a packaged food, you want to look at the sugar content, you want to look at the fiber and the protein. Now, if the sugar is, similar to the fiber and protein, that's a safe bet that it's a low sugar food, okay? So when you are looking for weight loss and you want to reduce the amount of sugar in your diet, you want to focus on getting more fiber and more protein than you do of the sugar. So again, if you like cereal, this is actually a great cereal that you guys can try. Oatmeal is wonderful because it has a lot of fiber in there. The yogurt that I mentioned, not the Activia, the Greek Liberté yogurt, again, we look at it, the protein is so much higher than the sugars. And here we see that the sugar is not being added in because we look at the ingredient list. There's just skim milk and bacteria cultures. So you're not seeing like fructose or sucrose. You're just seeing milk. So this is, yogurt is a great weight loss or a food to have for weight loss because it gives you a lot of the protein as well. So when you're looking for losing weight, you want to focus on foods that have more fiber and more protein than it does of sugar. I hope I answered that. Does the brown rice contain less sugar than white rice, similar between brown flour and white flour? Okay, so the reason why brown rice is better for you or brown flour is because it contains more fiber. So it's not so much of the sugar content, it's the fact that it has a lot of fiber in it. So what fiber does in our body when it sees sugar, if you have a food that contains fiber in it, you're not going to see that spike in sugar because it's going to mask it almost. It's going to just cover it up. So the more fiber you have in your diet, the better it is for you in terms of kind of reducing how the sugar affects your body. So that's why brown rice is much better for you than white rice and brown or whole wheat flour. It's because it's using the entire grain, the whole grain. The grain is where you see where the fiber comes from. So in white flour, that grain is stripped away, and that's how you get a refined white flour. But with whole grain flour, you have the entire grain intact, and so the fiber is intact. It's not being separated. So that's how it helps with the sugar. So it does, in our body, the way it works, it just reduces the sugars, the spikes that we see. So it's a much healthier option to have, brown rice and whole grain wheat flour. Okay, so next question. How does excess sugar affect your mood and energy levels? Great question. So when we have a lot of sugar, right, in our diet, we see a lot of spikes in our blood sugar, but this directly affects our energy levels. So yes, we'll have energy, and then we'll feel a huge slump in our energy when the sugar has, gone down. And it's just kind of like a yo-yo, so like you're feeling tired, so you have something else that has a lot more sugar in it, and then you have the same sugar crash, right? So the way the sugar rises in our body, it quickly rises and it quickly drops. That's the way our energy and our mood is going to be reflected as well. So, if you have a high sugar diet, yeah, your energy levels are going to be off as well. So one way to improve your energy level, again, is to combine food that has a lot of fiber and protein in it with whatever you're having. So for example, let's say you have a piece of fruit first thing when you wake up. So yes, fruit has sugars in it, right? Let's say you have a banana and you wake up, it has vitamins and stuff, it has a little bit of fiber, but again, it doesn't have any protein in it. So if you combine that banana, let's say with a handful of nuts, that is going to definitely sustain your energy and your mood. It is going to give you a lot more energy than it does with just having a banana on its own. So combining that with a protein source, you're just going to get so much more out of that than you would from just eating banana on itself. Again, even having dates, right? Especially during fasting, because that's one of the things that we eat right when we break our fast. We haven't eaten all day, and the first thing we have is something that's, high in sugar. So I always say it's good to have some dates with a few almonds as well, just to kind of keep our sugar levels down so we don't feel that, obviously when we break our fast, we eat, we feel much better, we have energy, and then we get so exhausted and tired. It's because the sugar levels are dropping. So just combining a sugar product, even if it's natural, with a piece of protein, like from nuts, that would be a much better way to kind of control or stabilize your sugars. So does potatoes contain more sugar than rice? So again, we're talking about the starches here, right? So the starches in our body, once it's digested, it turns into sugar, which is glucose. So they're equivalent in terms of how our body breaks it down. So what I like to say is try to keep, whenever you're having a meal, try to keep one starch. So let's say you're having a meal and it has rice, potato, and like chicken, for example. So you want to pick one starch. So you either pick the potatoes or you pick the rice. So because they both in our body just turn into sugar. So whether one has more than the other, it's kind of hard to tell. Like they're both break down as sugar in our body. So if you're going to have a meal, you want to stick with one starch. Again, the potato, like brown rice, is much better for you because it has the fiber in it. And with potatoes, it depends. Like if you're having it, with the skin, it does help a little bit more because you're getting a little bit of fiber from the skin as well. So, but at the end of the day, potatoes and rice, they do affect our sugar levels pretty much the same way. It just turns into glucose. Okay, another question. They have these fruit snacks like gummy bears, but just made out of fruit juices. The ingredients are just fruit juice and fruit juice pectin. What exactly is that? Okay, so fruit juice. Yeah, so fruit juice, again, it's like I gave you the example of the orange juice, right? So only ingredient in this orange juice is oranges. So it's just the juice of the fruit. So yes, that is better for you than having something that has, added sugars in it. But again, at the end of the day, it's just sugar, whether it's from fruit juice or from sugar itself. So the way our body breaks it down, it sees it the same way. So you want to be careful. Again, look at how many grams of sugar that particular snack has. And you want to, I'm assuming that snack does not have any protein or fiber in it. So it's, seen as more of a treat than an actual snack, I would think. So you want to be careful with how much your kids are having of that. And just realize that it is more of a treat than an actual snack to have. And fruit pectin, it's just, all fruit has it. It's a type of starch, and pretty much it just makes it more solid. It's kind of like a gelatin, like from a fruit, essentially. So yeah, just be careful with snacks that list fruit juice because it is just a type of sugar, so you want to be careful. I think I've listed it over here. Fruit juice concentrate, it's another word for sugar. Does anyone have any more questions? All right, well, thanks so much for listening, and I hope you guys learned something. If you have any other questions, again, please just email me, and I'll be more than happy to help you guys. Thank you so much. Enjoy the weekend. Okay, gracias.